She was a homeless girl, slept on sidewalks, ate leftovers. But that night, when a stranger collapsed on the street, everyone walked past. She stopped. She took off her shawl and covered him. She had no idea that that man was a billionaire. And the next day, what he did left the entire world speechless.
Rain fell in thick sheets over the forgotten parts of the city, painting the back alleyways in puddles of shadow and cold. 19-year-old Alma, with dirt-streaked cheeks and clothes that hadn't been dry in days, crept silently behind a closed bakery, scavenging for anything edible, anything untouched by rats or rot. Her stomach growled with the ache of 2 skipped meals, and her eyes darted toward a discarded crate that held nothing but moldy bread crusts. Just as she turned to leave, resigned once again to hunger, a low, broken groan stopped her. She froze. It came again, this time louder and desperate. Alma stepped carefully around a rusted trash bin, and that's when she saw him. An older man, probably in his 60s, collapsed behind the dumpster. His coat was shredded, soaked from the rain, his beard wild and gray, clinging to his thin jaw like seaweed. His eyes fluttered. He clutched his chest, coughing uncontrollably, his fingers trembling from what looked like either a heart attack or something far worse. People had passed by earlier. She remembered hearing their hurried footsteps, the conversations, the laughter fading down the street. But none of them stopped. None of them even looked his way. Alma hesitated for just a moment. She didn't know him. He could be dangerous or contagious. But something in her heart, that instinct she could never fully explain, pushed her forward. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she checked his pulse. Weak, faint. His lips were turning blue. Alma didn't have a phone, or money, or even proper shoes. But she had one thing, her blanket. Torn, faded, but still warm enough to be the only shield between her and the night. Without thinking, she ripped off a piece and wrapped it tightly around his shoulders, trying to keep his body temperature stable. Then she stood up, ran, barefoot, through the sludgy water to a 24-hour diner she knew had a payphone. She pushed the door open, ignoring the looks from late-night patrons who turned away at her smell, her clothes, her dripping presence. Alma slammed her last coins into the machine, dialing emergency services. Her voice cracked as she gave the alley address and begged them to hurry. Then she ran back. She sat with him, whispering soft words, telling him he would be okay, even though she had no idea if that was true. His breathing slowed, more labored.
The name and the unknown. Then, with one final effort, his eyes flicked open. He reached out, weakly grabbed her wrist, and in a raspy whisper, barely louder than the rain, he said 2 words that made no sense to her. Silas. Stone. Alma blinked. She didn't know the name, never heard it before. It meant nothing to her, and yet he looked at her as if it should, as if those 2 words held weight. And then, just like that, he lost consciousness. Minutes later, the flashing lights cut through the alley. Paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, barely stabilizing him. They asked her questions, but she didn't have answers. No ID, no contact, nothing. Just a dying man and a name that hung in her mind like a riddle. Silas Stone. As the doors of the ambulance slammed shut, Alma stood alone in the wet alley, barefoot, blanketless, and colder than before, yet strangely stirred by something she couldn't quite name. She had no idea that the man she just saved wasn't homeless at all. He wasn't poor. He wasn't alone. He was one of the wealthiest and most powerful billionaires in the country, hiding from a world he no longer trusted, a world that had betrayed him. And in saving him, Alma had just become part of a secret far bigger than she could imagine. The city moved on around her. People walked by again, umbrellas up, eyes down, unaware that in that narrow alley a choice had been made. A life had been saved, and a story was about to unfold that would change everything, forever. At the hospital, Alma waited the entire night on a cold, hard bench just outside the emergency room. Her clothes were still damp from the rain, her stomach empty, her eyes heavy with fatigue. But she didn't move. Every time the doors opened with a squeak and a nurse walked out, her head would lift in hope, only to fall again. No one came to speak to her. No family members, no news reporters, not even a curious stranger. Just silence. Cold, sterile silence. After hours passed, a nurse finally approached and asked, "Are you a relative of the man who came in tonight?" Alma paused. Her heart pounded. She knew if she said she was homeless, if she told them she had no ID, no address, no phone, they might throw her out, maybe even call social services. So she did what she had learned to do on the streets. She lied. With a soft voice and hesitant eyes, she said, "Yes, I'm his niece. My name is Elena. Elena Summers." The nurse nodded and scribbled the name on a clipboard, not asking any more questions. Just another face in the night, she thought. But Alma wasn't just afraid of being thrown out. She was afraid of being forgotten.
She had grown used to being invisible, to people walking past her like she didn't exist. But something about that man, something about the way he clutched her wrist and whispered, "Silas, Stone," it lingered in her mind. She didn't know the name. It meant nothing to her. Not then, not yet. She wasn't allowed past the security doors, so she stayed in the hallway, curled up in the corner, using what was left of her blanket for warmth. She drifted in and out of sleep, not knowing the storm that was about to unfold. Because what Alma didn't know was that the man she saved that night wasn't just any stranger. He was Silas D. Stone, a billionaire tech CEO who had disappeared 3 weeks ago under suspicious and highly publicized circumstances. His face had been on every newspaper, every news channel, every social media platform. Theories ran wild. Some said he had been kidnapped, others believed he faked his death, and some claimed he had lost his mind and gone into hiding. But Alma? She didn't know any of that. She didn't own a phone, didn't watch TV. She didn't follow the world because the world never followed her. She lived outside the headlines, in the quiet, forgotten shadows of the city.
And yet, by pure chance, by sheer instinct and kindness, she had rescued the very man the entire country was searching for. Now, inside a private recovery room, guarded by men in suits and machines that beeped quietly in the dark, Silas Stone stirred. He had been unconscious for nearly 12 hours, but as the sedation wore off, his fingers twitched, his lips trembled, and his voice croaked the only thing on his mind. "Where is she? Elena Summers." His assistants were stunned. "Sir, you mean Elena Summers?" He nodded slowly. That name, the only thread he remembered clearly. Not their stockholders, not his board, not his corporate empire. Just that name. And outside, sitting alone on a bench with no idea of the world she had just stepped into, was a girl who didn't even know the name she gave, had just been written down in one of the most powerful hospital security logs in the country. The search for Silas Stone was over, but the story of Elena Summers was only just beginning.
Silas D. Stone, the man Alma had rescued from a cold alley, had not disappeared by accident. He'd staged it. Weeks before, he'd slipped away from the public eye, from his corporate empire, from the chaos of press briefings and boardroom whispers. Not because he was sick in the way tabloids suspected, but because he was sick in the soul. Decades of power and privilege had surrounded him with people who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. His children, born into riches, had grown distant and calculating, more obsessed with inheritance than intimacy. His executive board had begun pushing for control, scheming behind closed doors to remove him quietly. Silas wasn't dying of illness, he was dying of loneliness, of betrayal, of a creeping suspicion that perhaps kindness in its purest form had vanished from the world. That was the point of it all, the disguise, the vanishing act, the suffering. He wanted to disappear, not just to hide, but to see, if stripped of name, wealth, and legacy, anyone, anyone at all would stop to help. And then there was Alma. No cameras, no glory, no rewards. Just a shivering, starving girl with nothing to her name, who tore her only blanket in half to keep him warm. A girl who spent her last coins on a phone call, not for herself, but for a stranger. She had no idea who he was. She only knew he was dying. And that was enough for her to care. That single act did more than warm his body. It shook his heart. It proved something to him, that somewhere, beneath the dust and greed of the world, compassion still lived. When Silas awoke in the hospital, frail but alive, the first thing he did was whisper to his assistant, "Find her, but don't tell her who I am, not yet." The search began quietly. Through diner security footage, the ambulance logs, and the bakery's alley cam, they found her. They learned she gave a fake name, Alina Summers, a girl with no ID, no address, no trace. But they found her anyway. When they finally approached her, they didn't speak of billionaires or rescues or rewards. Instead, they offered a quiet opportunity. Gardening, they said. Somewhere private, somewhere clean, meals included, a bed, fresh clothes, a new start. Alma didn't ask too many questions. Life had taught her not to. When the car arrived to pick her up, she simply got in, holding nothing but a plastic bag with her tattered belongings and a cautious hope in her chest.
But the place they took her to wasn't just a house. It was a mansion, no, a fortress, towering behind iron gates and trimmed hedges. The kind of estate she'd only seen on magazine covers tossed in trash bins. The air was unnaturally still, the lawn too perfect. Silent staff in black suits greeted her without smiling. The hallways echoed when she walked. There were rules, strange ones. Certain doors were locked at all times. Meals were left at her door, never served in person. She wasn't to speak to the servants unless spoken to. Every morning she was led to the back gardens where she tended plants while being watched, not intrusively, but closely. She never saw the owner, never heard a voice echo down the marble halls. But what unsettled her most wasn't the silence or the luxury. It was the room she discovered by accident. One wrong turn past a half-open corridor door led her into a long hallway lined with gold-framed portraits, and at the very end, dozens of pictures. Of her, Alma, or Alina, sitting in the alley, feeding birds, sleeping on a bench, holding the phone in the diner. Some were from angles only a hidden camera could catch. Some were taken the night she saved him. Some, even earlier. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. What was this place? Who had been watching her? And why did it feel like, once again, she'd stepped into something far bigger than herself? One quiet evening, long after the estate had gone still, Alma wandered through the dim corridors, her footsteps echoing softly against the marble floors. Something about the mansion still unsettled her, not just its size or silence, but the feeling that it was watching her. That night, curiosity led her to a dusty old library. As she ran her fingers across the spines of forgotten books, one shelf gave way with a faint click. Behind it, a hidden door. Heart pounding, Alma pushed it open and stepped inside. It was a small room, cold, dimly lit by a single lamp. And on the wall, dozens of documents, files, photos, all of them of her. There were baby pictures, school records, medical history, even her original birth certificate, with a name she hadn't heard in years. Her real name, not Elena, Alma. Alma Rivera. She stood frozen. Who had kept all this? Why? Then, a sudden sound. The soft hum of electricity. The lights snapped on overhead. She turned, startled, and there he was. Silas, standing in the doorway. Calm, almost smiling. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked gently.
Alma stepped back, confused, breath shallow. "Who are you?" she whispered. Silas walked slowly into the room, looking at the files, at the photos, at her. And then he told her everything. Years ago, before the suits, before the money, before the headlines, he had been just a man deeply in love, not with Alma's mother, but with the family they shared as friends. Alma's mother had once helped him in his darkest moments, before he became the Silas the world now knew. They were close, like siblings, trusted companions. She was one of the few people who had never asked him for anything. When she died, tragically, in a fire caused by a faulty heater, Alma, just 6 years old, was placed in the foster system, lost in the chaos. Silas had searched, for years, through records, through orphanage logs, even private investigators, but Alma had disappeared without a trace, until 3 weeks ago, when she, unknowingly, saved his life. "It wasn't random," he said, his voice quiet, reverent. "It was destiny." Alma's eyes welled up, lips trembling. Why didn't you tell me?" Silas looked at her, something sorrowful behind his gaze. "Because I had to know who you'd become, not because of money, not because of status, but on your own."
"And Alma, you didn't just pass the test." He turned to a nearby desk, clicked a remote, and a screen lit up behind him. Security footage, black and white. It was that night, the alley. The moment Alma found him collapsed, bleeding. The way she panicked, held his hand, screamed for help, and finally, how she stayed with him, even when it meant nothing in return. "The world," Silas said, "has forgotten what compassion looks like. But you reminded me. You reminded everyone." She was speechless. The moment felt too big for words. "I recorded it," he continued. "Everything. And when the time is right, the world will see it. They'll see you, what you did, who you are." Alma's knees buckled slightly as she sat down in the nearby chair, still processing. All her life she had felt invisible, like someone passing through shadows. But now she was being told that her pain had meant something, that her kindness had been seen, remembered, cherished. Silas knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You were never alone. I just hadn't found you yet." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, just the quiet hum of the hidden room surrounding them. Then Alma finally whispered, "So what now?" Silas looked at her, a twinkle in his eye. Now the world finds out who you really are and what one act of kindness can do."
The video went live, and within hours, it caught fire. News outlets, blogs, talk shows, all with the same headline: "Homeless girl saves dying man, not knowing he's a billionaire." But it wasn't just a headline. It was a story that gripped hearts around the world. Alma, who had once wandered the streets invisible, was now the face of something much bigger. But Silas didn't just give her money, or fame, or sympathy. No, he gave her something most people never get back once it's taken: her identity. Her story, her voice. She was no longer a forgotten soul in the system. He gave her a home, not just a roof, but a space that was hers, with her name on the door. He gave her a purpose, not just a job, but a seat at the table. Alma was now a board member of the Stone Foundation for Lost Children, the very institution Silas had once created to save kids like her. The irony? She'd become the voice of it. And now the world was listening. She stood in front of a grand hall that echoed with applause. Hundreds of people, flashing cameras, journalists in every corner. And Alma, dressed in a simple but elegant white dress, walked to the stage not as a homeless girl, but as a symbol of what happens when kindness meets destiny.
Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the mic. The lights were warm on her face, but she didn't blink. "I didn't know who he was," she began, her voice steady. "I just knew someone needed help. I didn't think I was saving anyone. Truth is, I was the one who needed saving." The crowd went quiet, silent, leaning in. Behind her, a screen displayed images. Hers sitting on the cold pavement, offering bread to a man who looked invisible to the world, a billionaire disguised in sorrow. And then the transformation. Her in the mansion, her at the foundation, her smiling, and him standing beside her. Silas stepped forward as the crowd rose in a standing ovation, but he didn't take the mic. He didn't wave. He didn't speak to the crowd. He leaned in gently, so only she could hear him. And with a whisper thick with emotion, he said, "You didn't save me that night, Alma. You saved the part of me I thought I'd lost forever. The part that believed people could still be good. The part that believed money didn't define worth. The part that had been buried under years of boardroom betrayals and family disappointments. That night, when she handed him bread without asking for anything in return, she awakened the humanity in him that had gone silent.
He had all the power in the world, but she reminded him what it meant to truly feel alive. From that day on, Alma's story wasn't just a viral video, it became a movement. Schools played it in classrooms, shelters framed it on walls. Donations poured into the foundation from across the globe. And most importantly, children who had felt forgotten began to believe again. Because if Alma, a girl with no roof, no family, and no name could rise, so could they. She didn't ask for the spotlight. She didn't expect the praise. She only wanted to help. And in doing so, she helped heal a man, mend a foundation, and inspire a world that desperately needed to remember what compassion looks like. Her story was never about pity, it was about power. The quiet kind, the kind that changes lives without making a sound. And that was her legacy. Not the money, not the mansion, but the moment she gave, with empty hands and a full heart.